When Dr. Anna invited me to preach this morning, I looked up the assigned text before responding. Unfortunately, it was a cursory look. Joy? I can do that. A week later, having wrestled with this text, I tried to pawn it off on Jacob, who, like a big brother, and here we're talking height, not age, gently suggested that perhaps because I was graciously invited, I needed to be the one to bring this text to you. Will you please pray with me? Oh God, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of our hearts, and the actions of our life together be found in glory and acceptance by you. Amen. There is a certain amount of mystery about this text. Most scholars believe it to be a reflection on Israel's return from exile following 70 years in captivity. It's easy to understand the joy in that return. It signals the end to their enslavement and a return to the land God had given them. They've lived through a difficult time while holding on to their faith that God would one day restore them to their homeland, where once again life would be good, rich, and full, a time when God would bless them and once again make of them a great nation. But their return was not an easy one. What they found when they got home was their temple was destroyed, their land desecrated, and their people scattered. It's hard to imagine a scenario where returning to a devastated homeland would be a cause for praise, celebration, and joy. We could imagine the grief and pain of discovering all that destruction, of coming to the realization that everything you dreamed of and hoped for is lost. And we can imagine being overwhelmed by what it would take to restore it to the glory that we once remembered. But that's not what we're given here. Instead, we're given a dream-like picture of how things used to be, and a belief that God will restore their land and everything that they've lost. I'm guessing that some of you have stood in those places. Sometimes when you're knee-deep in the mire of grief or disappointment, when you're overwhelmed by circumstances beyond your control and there's no end in sight, it can be hard to find a way forward. It's that kind of fear and uncertainty that this psalm speaks to. It's there you find joy, not in shallow promises, but in the knowledge that God can make a way out of no way. You see, joy is more than mere happiness, more than contentment, more than gratitude, though all these things are components of joy. Joy can share space with sadness, fear, anger, and even unhappiness. Joy endures hardship. It's what Israel found at the end of exile. It's found in their faith that God will restore what's been lost, reminding them and us that joy is a state of mind that can be found even when life is uncertain, even in times of change, grief, and loss. That is joy. It's not right there on the surface. It's not easy to spot. It requires faith, community, and a willingness to go deep. Perhaps you've been there as well. A place of longing and hoping for a restoration of what once was, a remaking of the past, which is more comforting than the hard work of welcoming something new that God is doing. Instead of envisioning a hope for the future, we sometimes become nostalgic, holding on to the past, sharing stories of what life was once like in the hope that we can recreate it again. We think that we're more comfortable going back to what we know rather than stepping into the unknown future that holds both our hope and our joy. It's been said that the greatest liability for us as individuals, communities, and churches is when we become nostalgic, wanting to replicate the past without looking to see what God is doing in the present. It's when we think that the past looks better than the future that we put ourselves at risk. The joy found in this psalm is not simply that God would restore all that was lost, but that God could be trusted to be God, to lead them forward into the unknown. Their joy is derived from memory, from recalling the many things and the many ways in which God has always been with them, and yet, and here's the tricky part, not getting stuck in the past. Recently, we celebrated 100 years of ministry in this community. It was a glorious celebration of who we are and of all that God has done in this community of faith. What gives us joy as we recall where we've been is the faith that God is with us as we move forward into changes that will surely come. God doesn't invite us to replicate the past. God invites us to move forward in joy and in the knowledge that as we do, God goes with us. Amen.